Get your black ass out of that seat before I drag you out myself.
Ma'am, I paid for this upgrade. Here's my boarding. Here's my boarding.
I don't care what you paid, honey. First class isn't a zoo, Chi.
Please, I haven't done anything.
You breathing the same air as me is doing something. You smell like the back of the plane. Go sit where you belong. Strockstein, Smeejower, at Udo you bite hape fake a you whore the tot.
Open palm crack across the cheek of a black woman in seat 3B, in front of 50 first-class passengers. The flight attendant leaned down, smirking, but the quiet woman she just struck was the only person on that plane who could strip every license in that cockpit with one phone call. Let's rewind. 2 hours before that slap, none of this looked like it was coming. It was 10:41 on a Thursday morning at Denver International Airport, Gate B82. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a wide-body Boeing 767 sat hooked to the jet bridge, its white fuselage catching the high Colorado sun. The board behind the gate read, Apex Continental 2612, non-stop to Washington Reagan, on time. At a small table near the coffee kiosk, a woman in a charcoal blazer sipped her cappuccino and turned a page of her novel. Her name was Olivia Grant. She was 48 years old, tall, with the kind of calm posture that comes from a life of being watched carefully by people who wanted her to fail. Her hair was pulled back. Her shoes were practical. A thin silver watch on her left wrist ticked softly, the last gift her father had given her before he passed. She thanked the barista by name when he refilled her cup. She let an elderly couple board ahead of her when the gate agent called Group 1. She bent down to help a young mother lift a stroller over the jet bridge threshold. The mother said thank you, like she wasn't used to hearing it. Olivia smiled and said, "You're doing great. Just a few more hours." Here's something nobody at that gate knew. Olivia Grant was the Deputy Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, the second highest federal official in the entire U.S. civil aviation system. She had the legal authority to suspend any pilot's certificate in the country. She could revoke any flight attendant's credential with a signature. She could ground an entire airline before lunch. Her federal identification badge, navy blue leather, embossed with a gold FAA seal, was tucked quietly in the side pocket of her carry-on. She never flashed it. She never had to. She was flying to Washington for work. She had chosen Apex because the schedule fit. She had never flown this airline before. She usually took the other major carriers out of Denver. And she had paid out of her own pocket to upgrade to seat 3B because she wanted to sleep during the 3-hour flight, and she wasn't allowed to bill the government for first class. That was the entire reason. No hidden plan, no secret mission. Just a tired woman going to work. At the jet bridge door, 2 flight attendants were laughing at something on a phone screen. The first one, a woman in her mid-50s with a tight blonde bun and a small silver cross at her throat, was named Brenda Hollister. 23 years with Apex Continental. Union steward. The kind of seniority that makes a person forget she works for anyone. Beside her stood the purser, Gavin Whitmore. Late 30s, groomed within an inch of his life, the kind of smile that looked trained. Olivia handed over her boarding pass. Brenda's scanner beeped. She looked down at the pass. She looked up at Olivia. She looked down again. 2 full seconds. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She gave a small, barely visible sneer, then handed the pass back without a word. Olivia said, "Thank you." Brenda didn't answer. On board, Olivia settled into 3B, window side. She tucked her leather portfolio under the seat in front of her, slid her phone onto the tray, and opened her novel. Toni Morrison. The spine was cracked soft from years of rereading. The white businessman in 3A glanced over, gave her a polite nod, and went back to his newspaper. A few minutes before pushback, Brenda came through the first-class cabin with a tray of pre-departure drinks. Champagne flutes, orange juice, sparkling water. She stopped at 3A. "Good morning, sir. Something to drink before we push back?" She handed him a flute with a napkin, complimented his watch, laughed softly at something he said. Then she walked right past 3B without looking down. Olivia watched her move up the aisle. She didn't flinch. She didn't call out. She marked the time on her silver watch, 10:41, and turned back to her book. The businessman in 3A glanced at her, then at his champagne, then away. The plane pushed back from the gate. The engines spooled up. And somewhere, in a cabin that still looked perfectly ordinary from the outside, a quiet clock started ticking. 40 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign clicked off with a soft tone. The businessman in 3A had finished his second glass of champagne. He was halfway through a plate of warm mixed nuts that Brenda had brought him without being asked. Olivia Grant had not been offered water. She had not been offered a menu. She had not been offered a hot towel. She had not been acknowledged as a human being since she sat down. She marked this on her silver watch. Then she pressed the call button. The soft chime rang up front. Brenda Hollister saw the light and her mouth tightened. She walked down the aisle slowly, the way someone walks when they want you to know you're inconveniencing them. She stopped at 3B and crossed her arms. "Yes?" Olivia looked up from her book, warmly, professionally. "Good morning. I'd like a glass of water, please. And could I see the lunch menu?" Brenda sighed loudly. "Menu's first come, first served. We ran out of the chicken. You can have the pasta." "I'd still like to see the menu, please." Brenda rolled her eyes. She walked away. For a full minute, Olivia thought she wasn't coming back. Then Brenda returned with a laminated menu card in her hand. She didn't hand it over. She held it above Olivia's tray from about 6 inches up and let it fall. It landed crooked, one corner off the edge. "There," Brenda said. "Enjoy." She walked off again. She did not bring water. Olivia sat very still. She watched Brenda's back retreat up the aisle. She picked up the menu. She straightened it. She set it neatly beside her novel. She opened a note on her phone and typed one line with a timestamp. 11:22. Menu dropped from height. Water not served. She went back to reading. A few minutes later, the passenger in 2D, a white woman in her 40s with an expensive haircut, flagged Brenda down and asked a question about her seat. Brenda crouched down beside her, and her voice went soft and sweet. "Oh, ma'am, I apologize for the confusion. You know how it is. We've had some clerical upgrade situations lately. Corporate bumps people up for diversity reasons sometimes, creates these little mix-ups. We're doing our best to keep the standards up." She said it loud enough for 3 rows to hear. 2D glanced over at 3B. She looked uncomfortable. She looked away. Olivia's jaw tightened. One muscle in her cheek moved. That was it. She kept reading. The businessman in 3A shifted in his seat. He stared at his empty champagne flute like it had answers. Olivia stood up. She walked slowly up the aisle toward the first-class lavatory. Her movement was careful, unhurried. The walk of a woman who had worked her whole life to never, ever look angry in a public space. She reached the galley curtain. Gavin Whitmore stepped out in front of her. He held up one hand, palm out, like a security guard. "Ma'am, first-class lav is for first-class passengers." Olivia blinked once. "I am in first class. Seat 3B. Gavin tilted his head. "I'll need to see your boarding pass." I showed it at the gate, and to your colleague. I'll still need to see it. Policy. Olivia walked back to her seat. She pulled the pass from her portfolio. She walked back to the galley. She handed it to him. Gavin took it slowly. He held it up to the reading light. He squinted at it like it was written in a foreign language. He turned it over. He turned it back. He looked at Olivia. He looked at the pass. He did this for nearly 15 seconds. Huh, he said finally. Okay. He didn't move. The rear lav has shorter lines, he added, smiling. Might be more comfortable for you. His body was still blocking the aisle. Olivia looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned around and walked back to her seat without using the restroom. 3A refused to make eye contact with her. She sat down. She opened her phone notes. She typed, 11:34. Purser Whitmore blocked first-class lavatory access. Demanded secondary boarding pass verification. Redirected to the rear cabin. She took a slow breath through her nose. Lunch service began. The cart rolled out with 2 flight attendants working it. Brenda led. Gavin followed behind. They plated meals on proper china. Seared chicken with rosemary potatoes or pasta with a cream sauce. Fresh rolls warmed in the oven. Small salads, real butter. A choice of red or white wine. They served 1A. They served 1B. They served 1C. They served 2D with extra warmth. Brenda laughing at something the woman said. They served 2F, where a silver-haired lady named Margaret Ashby sat quietly reading a hardcover biography. They served 3A, the businessman, who accepted the chicken and a new glass of champagne without looking up. Then the cart stopped at 3B. Brenda reached down below. She pulled out a single item. A cold, triangle-shaped sandwich sealed in clear plastic. The kind they hand out for free in the back of the plane on short flights. She dropped it onto Olivia's tray table with a small slap of plastic. We ran out of first-class meals, Brenda announced. Loud, clear, so every row could hear. Thought you'd be more comfortable with this anyway. She smiled. It did not touch her eyes. The businessman in 3A froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at his plate. He looked at Olivia's sandwich. He looked out the window. Olivia set her book down. She looked up at Brenda. Her voice was so calm it almost sounded rehearsed. I'd like to speak with the purser, please. Gavin was already there. He slid in smoothly beside Brenda, clasping his hands in front of him like a waiter at a nice restaurant. Ma'am, is there a problem? I paid for a first-class seat. I'd like a first-class meal. Or at least the same meal I see every other passenger in this cabin eating. Gavin tilted his head sympathetically. I understand your frustration. Unfortunately, inventory is inventory. We're very sorry. I can bring you a complimentary pretzel pack if you'd like. Brenda snickered. Olivia didn't respond. She just watched them. Behind her, in seat 2F, Margaret Ashby closed her biography. She had been listening to every word. The silver-haired woman turned around in her seat and looked straight at Brenda. Excuse me, I'm not hungry. I'd like to give this young lady my meal. Gavin's smile faltered. Ma'am, that's not how it works. It's literally my food. I'm offering it to her. We can't transfer meals between passengers. Policy. What policy? Gavin didn't have an answer. He just walked away. Brenda followed. Margaret turned to Olivia. Their eyes met across the aisle. The older woman's face was tight with anger. Not performed, not for show, just the real kind. She gave Olivia the smallest nod. Olivia nodded back. Two strangers, one witness forming. Olivia sat very still for 30 seconds. Then she pressed the call button again. Brenda came stomping down the aisle. Her face was flushed now. Olivia had made her look foolish twice in front of 2D and 2F. Something in Brenda's posture had changed. She was no longer bored. She was angry. "What?" Olivia stood up. She did not raise her voice. "I'd like to speak with the captain, please. The captain is flying the plane. He can come back when it's safe to. I'll wait." "You are not speaking to the captain." "Ma'am, I am a paying passenger. I have the right to speak to—" Brenda stepped in close. Too close. She pointed one finger at Olivia's chest. "Sit down." Olivia slowly lifted her phone. She held it up between them, screen facing Brenda, camera recording. "I'm documenting this conversation. For the record, you skipped my drink service, refused to bring water, dropped my menu, blocked my lavatory access, and refused to serve me the meal I paid for. I'm now requesting to speak with the captain. That is a passenger right under federal regulation." Brenda's eyes went from narrow to wide. "Give me that phone." She reached for it. Olivia lifted her arm calmly and stepped back half a step. "Do not touch my property." Brenda lunged again. Olivia turned her shoulder. And that was when Brenda's open hand came up from the side and cracked across Olivia's cheek. The sound was sharp, flat, unmistakable, like a book slammed shut in a library. The entire cabin heard it. A woman in row 4 gasped out loud. Olivia's head snapped to the side. Her earring, a small gold hoop her mother had left her, popped loose and tumbled to the carpet. The inside of her lips split against her teeth. She could taste iron. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then Brenda, recovering, loud and performative for the cameras she didn't yet realize were on her. "She attacked me! You all saw it! She grabbed me! I want her restrained!" Olivia turned her face back slowly, red mark blooming on her cheek, blood on her lip, phone still in her hand, still recording. Her voice came out soft, level, certain. "Ma'am, you just struck a federal official." Brenda laughed, a short, ugly laugh. "Oh, honey, sure you are." Brenda spun on her heel and marched to the galley phone. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from fury. She snatched the handset off its cradle and punched the cockpit extension. "Captain, this is Hollister. We have a situation in first class. A disruptive passenger in 3B just assaulted me. She grabbed at my uniform. I want law enforcement to meet this aircraft at Reagan. I want her removed from the restraints." There was no pause, no investigation. No, let me hear the other side. Just a story, told as fact, to a man who had never questioned Brenda Hollister in 23 years. Gavin stood beside her, nodding along like a witness at a courtroom he had rehearsed. 2 minutes later, the cockpit door unlocked. Captain Dennis Caldwell stepped out. He was 6'2", silver-templed, his uniform pressed so sharp you could have sliced bread on the crease. 29 years with Apex Continental. 400,000 miles without a blemish on his record. He walked up the aisle with the slow, deliberate weight of a man who had never once in his life been wrong about anything. He stopped at 3B. He did not look at Olivia's cheek. He did not look at the blood on her lip. He did not ask what happened. He looked down at her the way a school principal looks at a lying child. "Ma'am, I've been briefed by my crew. You became physical with a flight attendant. That is a federal offense. You will remain in this seat for the remainder of this flight. If you stand up again, if you raise your voice again, if you so much as press that call button again, I will divert this aircraft to the nearest airport and you will be arrested. Am I clear? Olivia looked up at him. Her voice didn't waver. Captain, your flight attendant struck me in the face. I have it on video. I am asking you, respectfully, to review what happened before you make another statement. Caldwell's mouth curled into a thin smirk. There's no cabin video in the first class section, ma'am. Nice try. He leaned down a few inches, lowered his voice. Your people always think you know the rules better than we do. Your people. The words landed in the cabin like a dropped glass. You could almost hear them hit the floor. In 2F, Margaret Ashby stood up. The silver-haired woman was not tall, she was not loud, but when she stood, the cabin noticed. Captain, she said clearly, I watched the entire exchange. The flight attendant struck that woman. This passenger did absolutely nothing, not one thing. Caldwell barely turned his head. Ma'am, with respect, witnesses in high-stress moments are often mistaken. Please take your seat. I am not mistaken. Ma'am, sit down. Now. Margaret's face went red with the kind of anger that only comes from being dismissed at 73 years old. But she sat. She did not, however, put her phone away. She rested it in her lap, and she pointed the camera lens toward the aisle. Caldwell turned back to Olivia, satisfied. He nodded once at Brenda. He walked back to the cockpit, the door locked behind him. Brenda and Gavin conferred in the galley. Whatever they said to each other took less than 30 seconds. Then Gavin walked back to 3B with a new kind of energy in his step. The energy of a man who had been told he had backup. Ma'am, he said, under federal aviation regulations, when a flight attendant reports being assaulted, we are required to conduct a search of the passenger's carry-on items for weapons and for any unauthorized recording devices that may have compromised crew privacy. Please stand and move into the aisle. This was a lie. Not a small lie. Not a misremembered policy. A complete fabrication. No such regulation exists. Not in Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Not in the FAA Flight Attendant Handbook. Not in any crew training manual at any U.S. carrier. Olivia knew this for the simple reason that she was the second-ranking official at the agency that wrote those regulations. She stayed seated. Her voice was low and even. I do not consent to a search of my property. You have no legal authority to search a passenger's carry-on in flight absent a credible security threat, which does not exist here. Please return to your duties. Gavin smiled. Policy is policy, ma'am. He reached up and opened the overhead bin directly above 3B. He pulled down her carry-on. He set it on the empty business class seat behind her. He unzipped it in full view of the entire cabin. Phones came out. Nobody was hiding them anymore. Margaret Ashby's camera was rolling. The businessman across the aisle was recording. 3 passengers in business class were streaming to Instagram. A teenage girl in the last row of first class had her phone tilted up from her lap. The cabin had turned into an open-air courtroom, and Gavin Whitmore was performing for a jury he didn't yet realize existed. He lifted out a folded sweater. He set it down. He lifted out a paperback book. He set it down. He reached into the side pocket and pulled out a slim navy blue leather case. He flipped it open. Inside was a federal identification badge, gold seal, embossed letters, a name, a title. Gavin looked at it for exactly 1 second. He closed it. He dropped it back into the bag. Corporate ID, nothing. He zipped the bag. He dumped it on the carpet beside Olivia's seat. He walked away. Olivia stared straight ahead. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her breathing was measured. 3 slow breaths in, 3 slow breaths out. Brenda began her intimidation tour. Every 3 or 4 minutes, she walked past 3B on some fake errand. She slammed the galley curtain. She shoulder-checked Olivia's tray table as she passed. She sighed loudly. She muttered to Gavin within earshot, just loud enough to carry, just quiet enough to deny. Some people, I swear. This is why we have rules. She's lucky I didn't hit her harder. That last one caught 3A's attention. The businessman in the window seat had been pretending not to hear anything for almost an hour. Now he stood up, grabbed his newspaper, and quietly walked back to an empty seat in business class. He couldn't sit next to her anymore. Not because of her, because of what was happening around her, and because he hadn't said a word. Olivia now sat alone in first class. 50 other passengers, an empty seat beside her. She did not cry. She did not move. She opened her phone notes and she wrote down every detail, every timestamp, every exact quote, every name. Her handwriting on the small screen was neat, controlled. The penmanship of a woman who had been taking notes under pressure her entire professional life. In the cabin behind her, the tide was turning. A man across the aisle in business class leaned forward into first-class space. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I'm sorry. I should have said something earlier. I froze. I'm sorry." Olivia looked at him. Something in her face softened, just slightly. "Thank you for saying it now. That matters." He nodded. He sat back. But he didn't put his phone away. Brenda passed one more time. This time she didn't walk past. She stopped. She leaned down close to Olivia's ear. Her breath smelled like coffee and peppermint gum. Her voice was a whisper sharp enough for 3 rows to hear. "When this plane lands, the police are going to drag you off in cuffs in front of everyone. Your face is going to be on the news. You'll lose your job, whatever little job you have. Nobody is going to believe a word you say. You'll see what happens to women like you who can't behave themselves." She straightened up, smoothed her uniform, and smiled. "Enjoy the ride, sweetheart." She walked off. Olivia sat very still for a long moment. Her eyes moved to the small window beside her. Clouds below. 3,000-foot cumulus tops, white and endless. She looked at her silver watch. 11:26 a.m. Flight 2612 had roughly 45 minutes of airtime left before beginning descent into Reagan. She had 2 choices. Option 1, ride it out. Let herself be walked off this plane in handcuffs in front of every phone camera at a major East Coast airport. Spend the evening in a federal holding cell. Make a few phone calls the next morning. Let the machinery of justice grind slowly, maybe over weeks or months, while her bruised cheek healed and the video died in the news cycle. Option 2. Use what she actually had. She reached down to the floor. She lifted her carry-on up into her lap. She unzipped it. She took out her leather portfolio. She opened it on the tray table. Behind her paperback novel was a slim manila folder, stamped with the seal of the United States Department of Transportation. She closed the folder without opening it. She took out her government-issued phone. Encrypted. Emergency Wi-Fi enabled on every commercial aircraft in U.S. airspace by federal mandate. A mandate her own office had written. She looked down at the screen. She looked up at the galley where Brenda was laughing with Gavin. Then Olivia Grant, Deputy Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration of the United States of America, made the phone call that was about to end 4 careers before the wheels of Flight 2612 ever touched the ground. The call connected on the second ring. On the screen, a man's face appeared. Late 50s, silver hair, dark suit. Behind him on the wall, slightly out of focus but unmistakable, was a round seal. A blue circle, a pair of wings, and the words, Federal Aviation Administration. His name was Harold Whitfield, Director of Flight Standards. 20 years of shared work with the woman holding the phone. He took one look at her face, at the red handprint on her cheek, the split lip, the blood at the corner of her mouth, and everything in his expression went cold. Olivia, what happened? Harold, Apex Continental 2612, Denver to Reagan, seat 3B. A senior flight attendant struck me open-handed in front of the cabin 41 minutes ago. The captain has been fed a false narrative and has threatened me with arrest on landing. The purser conducted an unauthorized search of my carry-on. Crew names, Hollister, Whitmore, Caldwell, Pierce. Hold. Harold's eyes moved off camera. You could hear him typing. Fast. Got it. Pulling their certificates now. I am issuing emergency orders as we speak. From halfway up the aisle, Brenda saw the glow of Olivia's phone screen and snapped. Phone's off during flight operations. Hang up that call. She came storming down the aisle. Olivia turned the phone screen around. Slowly. The way you turn over a card in a game you've already won. Brenda stopped mid-stride. On the screen was a man in a dark suit, and behind him on the wall was the seal of the Federal Aviation Administration. Not a stock image, not a wallpaper, a real office wall, with real depth, with a real coffee mug in the corner of the frame. Harold's voice came through the speaker, amplified by the quiet cabin, loud enough for 3 rows to hear. Flight attendant, identify yourself. Full name and airline employee number. Now. Brenda's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Who is this? This is Harold Whitfield, Director of Flight Standards, Federal Aviation Administration. You are currently in direct contact with Deputy Administrator Olivia Grant. As of this moment, you are the subject of an active federal inquiry. Do not touch this passenger. Do not approach her seat. Do you understand me? Silence. Brenda's right hand drifted up. It found the small silver cross at her throat. Her knuckles went white. Oh, God. Gavin arrived behind her. He saw Brenda's face first, then the phone screen. His tan went gray underneath. Get the captain, Harold said. Now. Gavin ran. The cockpit door unlocked 30 seconds later. Captain Caldwell came out with the same stride as before. Halfway down the aisle, he saw Olivia still sitting calmly in 3B, holding a phone screen out toward him. He heard a man's voice through the speaker. He slowed. He stopped. He saw the seal on the wall behind the man. Captain Caldwell, Director Whitfield, Flight Standards. Confirm for the record that you are aware Deputy Administrator Olivia Grant is seated in 3B on your aircraft. Caldwell's eyes moved. Slowly. Phone. Olivia's face. Phone again. His mouth opened. No sound came out. Captain, I require verbal acknowledgement. I wasn't... Captain, your aircraft is now under active federal safety review. Upon arrival at Reagan, your entire crew, you, Pierce, Hollister, Whitmore, will remain on board until met by FAA inspectors and Airport Authority law enforcement. Acknowledge the order. A long pause. Acknowledged, Caldwell whispered. His voice cracked on the second syllable. In 2F, Margaret Ashby stood up for the second time that flight. She was 73, and her hands were shaking, but her voice was not. I want every person in this cabin to know. That woman in 3B is a senior federal official. I hope every one of you is still recording. I am. Phones tilted up, but now they were aimed at Brenda frozen in the aisle, at Gavin flat against the galley curtain, at Captain Caldwell whose knees were visibly bent as if his body weighed twice what it had 5 minutes earlier. Olivia stood up. It was the first time she had stood since the slap. She walked calmly to the galley. She did not raise her voice. She looked directly at Brenda, who now could not look back. I asked you for water. I asked you for a menu. I asked to speak with your captain. You struck me. And right now, before this plane lands, you have one chance to tell me something true. She reached into her carry-on. She pulled out the navy blue leather case. She flipped it open at Brenda's eye level. Gold seal. Photograph. Embossed letters catching the cabin light. Deputy Administrator / Federal Aviation Administration / United States of America. Brenda stared. Her chest rose and fell fast. Olivia's voice was steady, almost gentle. Did you strike me because I am a black woman? Brenda's lips trembled. And she said it, loud enough for 40 phones to catch every syllable, loud enough to make every major network by 6 p.m. that same day. I thought you were nobody. Olivia lowered the badge. Ma'am, that was never your call to make. The rest of the flight happened in a silence so complete you could hear the hum of the cabin air system for the first time all morning. Olivia walked back to seat 3B. She sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. She did not open her novel again. Her cheek was still red, her lip was still swollen. The small gold earring was still somewhere on the carpet, waiting to be found. A few rows back, Margaret Ashby stood up quietly. She walked forward, carrying her biography and her handbag. Without asking, she slid into the empty seat 3A where the businessman had been. She reached across the aisle and placed a folded tissue into Olivia's hand. She squeezed her fingers once, then let go. She did not say a word. Olivia's eyes closed for half a second, then opened. She nodded. At the rear of the first-class cabin, Brenda Hollister had been confined to the back galley by Gavin Whitmore, who was himself confined by the fact that his hands would not stop shaking. Brenda sat on a jump seat. Her makeup had started to run. Her silver cross was twisted around on its chain. She did not look up. She did not speak. She just sat there while the two of them waited for a plane to land that they already knew was not going to land at a normal gate. Flight 2612 began its descent into Washington at exactly 12:33 p.m. It did not taxi to its assigned gate. The captain's voice came over the PA, dry and mechanical, the way a voice sounds when the body it belongs to has stopped believing its own words. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been directed by ground control to taxi to a remote stand. Please remain in your seats. Out the window on the right side, Olivia could see them already. 3 black SUVs, federal government plates. 2 Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority police cars, red and blue lights spinning silently in the noon sun. 1 unmarked federal transport van parked just behind them. 8 men and women in dark jackets standing beside the vehicles, waiting. The Boeing came to a full stop. The engines wound down. The air stairs rolled up to the forward door. The PA clicked on one more time. This time, Caldwell's voice had nothing left in it. No authority, no certainty. Just a man hoping words could save something that was already gone. Ladies and gentlemen, We've been instructed to remain on the aircraft briefly, and I want to personally apologize to a passenger in first class for what happened during our flight today. It should not have happened. I take full responsibility." Nobody clapped. Nobody answered. The apology fell into the cabin and died there. 2 FAA inspectors boarded first, dark suits, ID badges on lanyards. They walked down the aisle past 50 filming passengers without looking at any of them. They stopped at the galley where Brenda sat. "Brenda Hollister, please stand." She stood. She could not keep her hands still. "Ma'am, I am serving you formal notice. Your flight attendant certification card is suspended, effective immediately, pending federal investigation. You are being detained by Airport Authority Police on suspicion of assault within the special aircraft jurisdiction of the United States." The handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The sound was small but final, like a lock turning in a door. Brenda's face crumpled. "Please, I have grandchildren. I didn't know who she was." The inspector looked at her for a long moment. His voice was flat. "Ma'am, you didn't need to know who she was. You needed to know who you were." They walked her off the plane. Gavin Whitmore was next. Same suspension, same escort, no cuffs. His federal offenses were paperwork offenses, a false report, and an illegal search, and those would wait for a federal courthouse. Captain Caldwell and First Officer Pierce were met at the cockpit door. Their airline transport pilot certificates were emergency suspended on the spot under Title 14, Section 61.13. They were asked to surrender their flight deck badges. Caldwell handed his over with a shaking hand. Pierce, who had never left the cockpit and never once spoken up, cried silently. Olivia Grant was the last passenger to stand. Margaret Ashby walked beside her down the aisle. Along the way, Margaret bent down and picked up one small gold earring from the carpet. She tucked it into Olivia's palm. The passengers in first class stood. A few clapped softly. A few couldn't look at her at all. Olivia walked off the plane with her portfolio under her arm and her mother's earring closed safely in her fist. By 6 o'clock that same evening, the story was already out of anyone's control. Margaret Ashby's video, 2 minutes and 11 seconds of steady, unshaking footage shot from seat 2F, ran as the lead story on every major network news broadcast in the country. CNN played it at 6:02, NBC at 6:04, Fox at 6:05. By midnight, it had been downloaded, reposted, and stitched into 1 million reaction videos by creators who had never set foot on an airplane in their lives. By the end of the weekend, the footage had cleared 80 million views across platforms. 5 words were playing on a loop. 5 words from a middle-aged flight attendant with a silver cross around her neck, speaking to a woman with a handprint on her face. "I thought you were nobody." They were printed on protest signs the next morning in 6 cities. They were read aloud on the floor of the United States Senate by Wednesday. They became the 5-word headline of an entire American conversation about who we believe, who we dismiss, and what the uniform of service owes the people it serves. The hashtag was simpler still. Hashtag Seat3B. The Federal Aviation Administration moved faster than the FAA had moved in a generation. Within 48 hours, the emergency suspensions became permanent revocations. Brenda Hollister. Flight attendant certification permanently revoked. Lifetime ban from FAA-certified cabin crew positions at any United States air carrier. Gavin Whitmore. Same. Lifetime ban. Captain Dennis Caldwell. Airline transport pilot certificate permanently revoked under 14 CFR 91.3 and 121.533. Class 1 medical pulled. He would never fly a commercial aircraft again. Not as a captain, not as a co-pilot, not as anything. First Officer Ethan Pierce. ATP certificate permanently revoked. Same grounds, plus complicity in filing a false safety report. 4 people walked onto Flight 2612 that morning with careers. 4 people walked off without them. The title of the story had just delivered on its promise. Apex Continental Airways, meanwhile, was starting to understand what it had signed for. The FAA opened a full Part 121 compliance review of the entire airline. The Department of Transportation opened a Title VI civil rights inquiry. The NAACP and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law filed a joint federal discrimination complaint within 72 hours. And by the end of the second week, a class action lawsuit had been filed by 212 former Apex Continental passengers. Black, brown, Muslim, disabled. Many of whom came forward only after watching Margaret Ashby's video and realizing they had encountered the exact same crew, the exact same airline, and the exact same treatment years earlier, in silence, alone. The criminal case moved on its own track. Federal prosecutor Vanessa Holbrook charged Brenda Hollister with 2 counts. Count 1, assault within the special aircraft jurisdiction of the United States, under 49 U.S. Code 46506 and 18 U.S. Code 113. Count 2, interference with flight crew members and attendants, under 49 U.S. Code 46504. It was the exact statute Brenda had tried to weaponize against Olivia. This time, it was applied correctly. Brenda had been the one whose behavior threatened the safe operation of the aircraft. Brenda had been the one interfering with a passenger's lawful rights. The law had come back around on the woman who had tried to hide behind it. 3 months later, the trial opened in Federal District Court in Washington, D.C. Judge Eleanor Barrington presided. She was 64 years old, 22 years on the federal bench, and famously allergic to theatrics in her courtroom. Olivia Grant took the stand on the second day. She wore a Navy suit. She kept her answers short, precise, and unadorned. No adjectives, no embellishment. Just times, names, and facts. Margaret Ashby testified the next morning. Her hands were steadier in the witness box than they had been on the plane. When the prosecutor asked her why she had kept filming, Margaret said simply, "Because nobody else was going to." 6 other passengers testified over the following 2 days. The cabin video played in the jury box 3 separate times. The sound of the slap, Brenda's face, the 5 words. On cross-examination, Brenda's defense attorney tried to argue that Olivia had provoked the incident by refusing to comply with crew instructions. Judge Barrington cut him off before he finished the sentence. Counsel, compliance with a crew member's lawful instructions does not include accepting an open-handed strike to the face. Move on, or sit down. The gallery laughed softly. Brenda wept silently in her seat. The jury returned a verdict in 4 hours. Guilty. Both counts. Brenda Hollister was sentenced to 36 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, and ordered to pay $63,000 in restitution to Olivia Grant. Olivia donated the restitution in full to a scholarship fund for Black students pursuing careers in commercial aviation at historically Black colleges and universities. She never kept a dollar of it. Gavin Whitmore pleaded guilty to 1 count of making false statements to federal officials, under 18 U.S. Code 1001. 18 months in federal prison, 2 years of supervised release. Dennis Caldwell and Ethan Pierce were not criminally charged. They had not physically assaulted anyone, But their sworn depositions, released under the Department of Transportation's transparency rules, told a different kind of story. Years of racist comments logged in prior crew reports. Complaints from black passengers, Muslim passengers, and Latino passengers going back nearly a decade that had been quietly buried by Apex Continental's Human Resources Department before ever reaching the FAA. Both men were named in a civil wrongful termination and retaliation lawsuit brought by a former black first officer at Apex, whom Caldwell had pushed out of the airline 8 years earlier. That lawsuit settled for $9 million. Apex Continental itself faced the biggest reckoning. Chief Executive Officer Gregory Sanderson appeared before cameras within the week, read an apology written by a crisis firm, blinked a lot, and announced a $118 million package of diversity training, independent oversight, mandatory recertification of every flight attendant and pilot in the airline, and direct restitution to the 212 class action plaintiffs. Sanderson resigned 6 months later, under shareholder pressure. The ripple kept going. 13 months after Flight 2612, the Passenger Dignity in Aviation Act was signed into law. Mandatory body cameras on all U.S. commercial flight crew, a federal passenger bill of rights, a confidential Department of Transportation discrimination hotline with real, staffed enforcement authority behind it. The law was known, in press coverage and on the House floor, as the Seat 3B Act. Olivia Grant gave exactly one televised interview. She gave it to a journalist she had known for 20 years. The interview was 11 minutes long. She said only this, quietly, near the end. This should not have taken a deputy administrator to get noticed. Every passenger on that plane who isn't a federal official deserved the same response I got. That is the work that comes next. 6 months after Flight 2612, Olivia Grant was in the air again. She was flying Apex Continental on purpose. Not because she had forgiven them, because she wanted to see for herself what had changed. She had booked an economy seat this time, row 22, middle of the aircraft, no special treatment requested. She wore the same charcoal blazer she had worn that Thursday morning in Denver. She carried the same leather portfolio. The airline had been recertified. Every crew member on board wore a small black body camera clipped to the collar of their uniform. It was a requirement now. Federal law. A little red light blinked on each one, steady as a heartbeat. About an hour into the flight, the purser came down the aisle with the beverage cart. She was young, maybe 26. When she reached row 22, she stopped. She looked at Olivia's face for a long moment. The way you look at someone when you're trying to decide if you're allowed to recognize them. She knelt down beside the aisle seat so she was at eye level. She spoke quietly so only Olivia could hear. "Ma'am, I just want you to know. What happened to you changed how we train. All of us. Every month we watch the video. Not to shame anyone. To remember. I'm sorry it had to be you. And thank you for not letting it go." Olivia reached over and took the young woman's hand. She held it for a moment. "Thank you," she said, "for doing the job right." The purser nodded. She stood up. She went back to her cart. The little red light on her collar blinked, steady, unblinking, keeping its quiet record of a world that was learning, slowly, how to be decent. The rest of the people in this story ended up where their choices took them. Margaret Ashby became a friend. She and Olivia met for lunch in Washington twice a year. Margaret used her small share of the civil settlement to endow a scholarship for young black women pursuing careers in commercial aviation. She called it the Seat 2F Fund. She did not put her own name on it. Brenda Hollister was 8 months into her 36-month federal sentence. She had written Olivia a letter from prison. The envelope had arrived at FAA headquarters, been screened by security, and placed on Olivia's desk in a plain manila folder. It had sat there for 3 weeks. Olivia had not opened it. She might never open it. That was her right, and she had earned it. Dennis Caldwell was driving for a rideshare service in Phoenix. He no longer wore a watch. Gavin Whitmore had completed his sentence. He worked the night shift at a distribution warehouse, moving boxes on a forklift. The uniform there did not give orders to anyone. Olivia Grant was still Deputy Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. In her office on Independence Avenue in Washington, beside her diplomas and her commendations and a small framed photograph of her father, there was one new item. It was a shadow box, black velvet backing. Inside, mounted carefully with a single pin, was a small gold earring, bent slightly out of shape, the kind of gold that had passed through 3 generations of the same family. Below the earring was a brass plate. The plate was engraved with 4 sentences, in letters small enough that you had to lean in to read them. Seat 3B. She asked. They answered. So did we. Here's the thing to remember. What protected Olivia Grant that morning wasn't kindness. It wasn't her calmness. It wasn't her grace under pressure, though she had all 3. What protected her was authority. The legal power to be believed when she said something happened. Most people who get treated the way Olivia got treated don't have that power. They get walked off the plane in handcuffs. They get arrested. They get fired before anybody checks the video. So the real question isn't what happens when the woman in seat 3B is the Deputy Administrator of the FAA. The real question is, what happens when she isn't? Drop your story below. Like if the verdict felt earned. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because there's another 3B out there. And I'm gonna tell that one too. Dignity isn't granted by a title. It's just a lot easier to see when the title shows up. Our job, yours and mine, is to make it easier to see without one.